Welcome to another episode of What's at Stake, a Penta podcast. I'm your host, Stratton Kirton, a managing director at Penta. Every 5 years, Congress must debate and pass a bill that decides national priorities for agriculture, conservation, nutrition, and forestry policy, better known as the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is one of the most impactful yet least understood processes that Congress regularly takes up. Joining me to discuss the upcoming 2023 Farm Bill are two of the smartest voices on U.S. agriculture policy. Jerry Hagstrom has decades of experience covering the Farm Bill and is currently a columnist at National Journal and the founder and executive editor of the Hagstrom Report, an agricultural news service. And joining us is Vincent Smith, professor of economics in the Department of Agriculture, Economics, and Economics at Montana State University, and director of agriculture policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute. Jerry, Vince, thank you for having us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
So let's start pretty broadly, and then we'll sort of narrow in on who should care about the Farm Bill and why. But briefly, do one of you want to tell us what is the Farm Bill, why does it matter, and why should people care?
Well, let me take that one. A short first cut. The Farm Bill passed randomly, it seems, actually, every 4 to 6 to even 8 years, depending on the difficulty of the bill and the difficulty of the political circumstances, addresses a whole bunch of different issues. How much taxpayer money should go to farmers and through what venues? What incentives are being created by the Farm Bill for food production, to which the answer turns out to be very little. What incentives are being created for mitigating pollution through the conservation titles, mitigating soil erosion, and that will bring us to issues around climate change policy that are deep in the heart of the Biden administration, if not in Texas. There's a crucial set of regulations around the availability of what we used to call food stamps, which we now call SNAP payments, supplemental nutritional assistance payments, that accounts for nearly 80% of all spending under the Farm Bill. There are issues around trade, humanitarian aid. Although not heavily funded through the Farm Bill process, agricultural research and development funding is also a major issue, and from the perspective of many economists, crucial issue over the next several years in relation to how can R&D be carried out, which is a regulatory issue which might be included in the Farm Bill or not, and also a funding issue for public R&D, which has really in real terms shrunk very substantially over the last 15 years. So that's a broad overview and very quick overview, which says, just as you said in your introduction, Stratton, this is a complex bill with lots of issues and correspondingly lots of stakeholders who want to have their say about their favorite program in the Farm Bill.
Jerry, is there anything we missed?
Well, I would just point out that the Farm Bill started in the 1930s under Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. And at that time, a much higher percentage of the American people lived on farms. And so it actually affected more people in terms of the real farm components of it. And at that time, you had an idea that the government was going to be able to predict how much needed to be grown. And so the farmers agreed to restrict production in exchange for farm subsidies. Over time, that has changed. We don't try to restrict production anymore because we export usually what we cannot consume in the United States. But over the years, the Farm Bill has become more complex. Conservation was always a part of the Farm Bill because in the 1930s, of course, we were dealing with the terrible situation of the winds and the soil depletion, the Dust Bowl. And then later on, the food stamps were added to the Farm Bill, and that came about for two reasons. The first was that there were poor people who needed food, and the second was that as the Congress changed and became more urban, it was becoming impossible to pass a Farm Bill without a nutrition component. Mm-hmm. We have many congressional districts in this country that have no agriculture whatsoever, Although now today they are trying to develop some urban agriculture, some of these vertical farms, et cetera. So you could say they have some interest in it, but mostly they care about nutrition programs. And also suburbanites really care about the conservation programs. They tend to be environmentally minded. And so those programs help create support for the Farm Bill in the House of Representatives. And one of the oddest things is, despite all the battles over the Farm Bill, when it actually comes to passing the bill, it gets wide support because it does so many things that affect so many people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to give you a sense, in the Senate, the last Farm Bill passed with, I think, 86 votes.
Wow.
Only 11 against. And Jerry's point on the role of the Farm Bill is really interesting because today there are less than 40, probably less than 35 congressional districts which have more than 5,000 farms in them. So in the House, it's a real struggle. In the Senate, it's a different story because, as someone pointed out to me many years ago, one farm typically accounts for 3 to 4 adult votes. So if you've got 20,000 farms in, say, Minnesota, you've got 80,000 votes, and the senators really care about those votes a lot.
And also they care about the people who are involved in all the industries that are associated with farming, the grain elevators, the crop insurance companies, as well, of course, as food processing, which is a bigger element in some places than farming itself.
Interesting. So you guys brought up the politics of the Farm Bill, and Jerry, you made the point that it's been a bit of a coalition between the direct agriculture producers, the farmers and ranchers, and the people who care about the nutrition title. So we just had an election, midterms, the House has flipped. Has that changed anything about how you're thinking about the Farm Bill next year? Are we going to see any important new faces and leadership on the Farm Bill, whether on the committees or off the committees?
Well, let me start. Jerry's got a real feel for this stuff. Glenn Thompson is going to be concerned about a couple of things.
And he's going to be the new
and
House
he's
Ag
going to be
chair,
the
right?
new chair of the House Ag Committee. And Scott from an Atlanta district will flip to being the ranking member. At least I believe that's going to be the case.
That's my understanding also.
Thompson is more concerned about budget, and that's being driven in part by his constituency within Congress. The right wing of the Republican Party in Congress doesn't. I don't know that they care a whole lot about spending, but they don't like to spend on people who don't like them. So he's got this path to walk in that he wants the bill to be bipartisan. He's already said that. He is concerned about proposed spending on climate change-related programs, particularly on incentives for production practices. And as an economist, I think the evidence is extremely weak that you'll get much out of that spending that matters for climate change mitigation. We can talk about that later. But he's going to be more concerned about budget. He's going to be forced to worry about the food stamp SNAP program in terms of trying to get more restrictions on who gets the money, particularly able-bodied workers.
Because one of you said that's 80% of the spending in the
That's
bill.
80% of the spending. The problem for the House, in my view, is that the Senate's going to ignore anything they do about SNAP. They're just not going to go down that route on a bipartisan basis. So whatever stuff comes out of the House, there'll be a real challenge to get any change to the current SNAP program, at least in terms of eligibility, who can have the program, have access to the program. And a lot of the Farm Bill is going to be like that. There will be a lot of, quote, Sturm and Drang from House Republicans about farm subsidies. Why are we paying people who are very wealthy or relatively wealthy, and that's where over 90% of the money goes,
I think Senator Grassley always publishes a statistic of how many farmers are located in Manhattan.
But whether much will actually happen is a different matter. I think in very English terms, the House proposes, but the Senate disposes. Maybe but Jerry can give you as many insights, if not more insights, than I can on this issue.
Well, I'll add on to what Vince said in a couple of ways. Yes, Congressman Thompson will be the chairman. Throughout the last couple of years, he has been very angry with the Biden administration over the ways in which they have increased food stamp benefits, or SNAP benefits, and also the way that they've been going about funding some of these climate change initiatives. He believes they should have had to consult with Congress, but Secretary Tom Vilsack says, no, we already have the authority to do this. And I think it's interesting. The Republicans haven't challenged the Democrats or the Biden administration in court. Mm-hmm. So I think really they do have the authority. They've just offended some Republicans in the Congress. One thing I'll point out about the way that the agricultural programs have evolved, the origin of these programs are, of course, with Democrats, because the Democrats were in total control during the New Deal, during the Roosevelt years. At that time, there were a lot of Republicans who were still free market people. They didn't like the idea of farm subsidies. But over time, the Republicans have become big supporters, particularly in the South, where you have plantation agriculture. They're big supporters of the farm subsidies, but they're less supportive, of course, of the nutrition programs because, as Vince indicated, they go to voters who don't vote for Republicans.
Right.
So this has changed the dynamics over the time. At the present time, most of the critics of big farm spending are Democrats, and you have a kind of split among the Democrats, with the rural Democrats supporting the traditional subsidies and the urban Democrats not. But another change there is we have very few rural Democrats now. Right. So what I'm going to be interested in is who among the House Democrats are going to be sitting on the House Ag Committee. A number of their members retired or they got defeated, and so they're going to have lots of openings. We'll have to see who that is, but most likely they're going to be urban and suburban people who are concerned with conservation, but most of all with nutrition programs. Even on the Republican side, there may be changes in the committee because, quite frankly, the Ag Committee is not considered as prestigious or as important as, let's say, one of the committees associated with defense or committees that might be passing out subsidies to high-tech industry. Those are the rising, defense isn't so rising, although it may be with the need for new weapons after all the distribution to Ukraine. But those industries are considered more important in a lot of districts, and when people can get positions on those committees, they will move off agriculture. One caveat on that, if it's a year where you're writing a farm bill, you may want to stay on agriculture.
Let me come back to this issue, by the way, of the authority that the Biden administration claims for the climate change programs. And we get in the weeds here. The Commodity Credit Corporation has been the sort of fake vehicle through which funds are transmitted for agricultural programs authorized through the Farm Bill. That funding level has been at $30 billion, but pre-pandemic, Donald Trump's explosion of spending on compensation for trade war losses to soybean producers and so on. Annual spending there was about $15 billion. And if the Secretary of Agriculture wanted to use additional monies up to 2017, between about 2010 and 2017, essentially to do much beyond an emergency aid, say, to Alaska for an earthquake, about $1 billion, they had to go back to Congress and get authorization. Mm-hmm. A Republican Congress in 2017 removed that constraint for obvious political reasons. They were concerned about buying rural votes. They knew the trade war was going to that Trump initiated was going to be adverse for many agricultural producers because, as Jerry pointed out, we export a lot of agricultural commodities. So currently there's no cap on the amount of that $15 billion or so extra dollars that can be used by the Secretary of Agriculture. No real limitations on it. An issue that is going to come up in the House and perhaps in the Senate is reimposing limits on the ability of the Secretary of Agriculture to use those funds. And that would affect the ability of the Biden administration to take $5 or $6 billion a year and allocate those monies for climate change related subsidies to incentivize climate friendly practices at the farm level.
I'll just add to explain this fund that Vince is talking about. The reason that this Commodity Credit Corporation exists as a line of credit at the Treasury is that the need for agricultural subsidies cannot always be predicted. Mm-hmm. And so
as prices go up or down.
As prices go up or down, right. So you might, and by the way, I'll just mention this. When we say that 80% of the funding in the Agriculture Department is nutrition related, that isn't necessarily true always. If farm prices are low and we're distributing a lot of subsidies, then that becomes a bigger part of the USDA spending. So it varies from year to year. In the 30 years that I've been covering agriculture, it's been 50-50 quite a bit of the time, but that's not the way it is now, and farm prices are very high. But anyway, the CCC, as we call it, the Commodity Credit Corporation, was set up so that the Secretary could pull money from the Treasury as needed up to a certain amount of money, usually.
To provide flexibility.
Yeah.
Just to very recent numbers. So in 2020, when there was a mix of pandemic issues, additional authorized spending through pandemic aid programs. Total spending on farm programs jumped to over $50 billion. Mm-hmm. And in a typical year over the last several years, spending on the SNAP program has been between $70 and $80 billion, depending on how many people are eligible and so on. So that just gives you an illustration. But normally, as this year currently USDA is forecasting, spending on farm programs will be about $15 billion. And that's sort of the long-run average over the last 20 years. Much lower.
Okay. So we've sort of talked about, it sounds like the answer to who should care about the Farm Bill is everyone.
Not consumers.
Let's see if we've missed anyone. We have farmers, we have food and ag companies, presumably manufacturing companies that support those efforts, people involved in export. I think we briefly touched on foreign aid, food aid, climate change, and conservation. Anybody we missed before we dive deeper into some of the issues?
Well, just a couple of numbers.
Of course.
Back in the 30s, about 40 to 50% of the population was on the farm. Today, less than 1% are involved actively in farming. That tells you why, as Jerry was pointing out earlier, politically, farmers don't carry near the sway they would have done in the 30s. The other big change has been most of the guys who get subsidies are very wealthy. Most of the farm families, women and men, are very wealthy. You're talking about rich people, mainly white, who overwhelmingly vote Republican. And in the 1930s, overwhelmingly relatively poor, overwhelmingly vote Democrat.
I will point out a couple of things about the farmers, the ones who get the subsidies. First of all, the origin of the government getting involved in agriculture has to do with what this expression, farmers manufacture outdoors. And so you do start with this issue that farmers have this issue that they can't deal with, they can't address in any way, except in some areas where you have irrigation. But in general, they can still be hit by a hailstorm or something. So that is one thing. And also that when we say these people are rich, it's a complicated distinction. Yes, they have a lot of wealth in land, but they also have a lot of expenditures on equipment, and the cost of production has gone up in those ways, even though it's more efficient with this big equipment. And those are the arguments that they would use to justify it. And I will add to that, anytime you really have a farm crisis, everybody in the community is behind the government subsidizing things and bailing them out because the way the farmers spend affects so much in the communities that surround them.
Right, absolutely. Did you have something to add, Vince?
Well, slightly to disagree. If you look at the numbers, among the farms that produce 85% of total output and get 85 to 90% of all the subsidies, about 90% of all the subsidies, you're looking at people whose average incomes, farm owners whose average incomes are in the $300,000 to $400,000 range, if not more. Depending on who they are. Bill Gates is the largest landowner in the country.
Yes, but he only gets farm rents. He does not. He does not get income directly from agricultural
but he does
production.
he gets the subsidies through higher farm rents.
Yes,
Well,
that is true.
Let me ask this question.
So just to finish up, so you will hear, and I've been told many times by farmers, I'm land rich and income poor, but what they don't mention is that even the largest farms, the owners get more than 50% of all of their income from non-farm activities. And that's actually the way in which today a family that owns a farm and may operate the farm ensures that they've got a risk management approach that's independent
diversified
of
income.
Yeah, exactly.
So we talked a little bit about the evolution of the Farm Bill in terms of the commodity program and the food assistance. I'm curious, Vince, I imagine you have a strong opinion on this. Over time, have subsidies grown, shrunk, changed? I know for a while there's a big focus on subsidizing crop insurance premiums versus direct payments. In the swath of the Farm Bill, in your opinion, it seems like you're in favor of fewer subsidies, if I could paint broadly, or smarter subsidies maybe is how you would say. But has the Farm Bill, what direction has it moved in?
If you look at the data, there have been 3 or 4 trends, and Jerry will correct me if I get this wrong because he knows these trends as well as not better than I do. In 1992, we spent $230 million on crop insurance subsidies. Today, we spend about $8 billion, of which $2.5 billion go to the crop insurance companies that didn't effectively exist prior to 1983. There was no, and there would be no crop insurance industry in the private sector, or almost no, if we didn't have the federal program. So we've created a $2.5 billion program. That's been a 40-year trend, accelerated in the mid-1990s through legislation. So from being a very trivial program in 1992, in terms of farm subsidies, the federal crop insurance program is the elephant in the room. I know as an academic that this program has increased risk-taking at the farm level in terms of planting on marginal lands, adopting riskier production practices. From the farmer's point of view, it's a risk management program because the taxpayer pays for every $3 of indemnities that go out, there $2 of those on average is covered by the taxpayer and only $1 by the farmer. It's a money-making proposition for the farms. They will say it's risk management, but it's money-making. And that's been a big shift. The other shift that we've had is that at least up until fairly recently, we've had a move away from subsidizing production of the major 16 or 18 commodities, corn, wheat, row crops, the classic subsidized commodities, in terms of what you get when prices are low, to subsidizing historical production, not current production. And that's been driven by the WTO agreements in part, and astute lobbying by the Farm Bureau, by the grain growers, by National Cotton, by the National Corn Growers Association and the Soybean Association, and said, "Oh yeah, we're going to get hammered in our international trade if we persist in subsidizing every bushel of wheat or every bowl of cotton." So that's been a shift. In 1985, spending on conservation programs was very low. In the last Farm Bill, it jumped to around about $4 to $5 billion a year, and that's going to go up to $6-7 billion a year moving forward, assuming that the Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act, what I think of as the Income Transfer Act, by the way, rather than inflation reduction. But that's been a big shift into conservation, some of which has been good and some of which has been wasted, like any government program.
Jerry, I'd both love to hear your thoughts and wonder if I could impose, as you're talking about issues like crop insurance, if you could give the perspective on the other side too, as well as, your own perspective.
Well, the crop insurance program really advanced in the 1990s when Congress decided that they wanted a stable program because they had been trying to pass these ad hoc disaster programs when you had a real problem. And so they wanted stability to that, and they established a bigger crop insurance program in which the government pays 2/3 of the subsidies for the
two-thirds
for farmers.
Of the premium.
They pay 2/3 of the premium. Yeah, they pay 2/3 of the premium, so that has become the core of the farm program now, and I really don't see a great deal of opposition to this, despite what Vince is saying. Politically, I think it's really popular.
I completely agree with Jerry. I'm a tilting at windmills person here.
Yeah. But I would say politically, the incredible thing about this crop insurance program is that in addition to establishing the support from the farmers, you have two other very important lobbies here, the crop insurance agents and the bankers. All the bankers now demand that the farmer take out crop insurance if they're going to get their operating loans. But there is one thing that's coming up now that isn't really a crop insurance issue, but an issue with the traditional farm subsidies, which are triggered by low prices, is that the prices are high, and so is the cost of production. They're higher than what was there when the program was revised the last time in 2018. And so now the farm groups are saying that they want higher reference prices, which are the prices that establish they're the triggers for paying farm subsidies. But if they get that, then that's likely to skyrocket the cost of farm programs, and that will be a very difficult issue in this Congress.
I completely agree. And these reference prices, by the way, only apply to the more traditional form of income and low price subsidy programs, not to crop insurance.
Okay.
Yeah.
The crop insurance programs, they set prices at which losses will be valued in the year that the person buys the policy. It's a very complicated story. Sometimes I believe it's complicated because they don't want anyone else to understand what's going on. But one of the issues that I know nothing about is the role of the CFTC.
I was going to say, maybe we can spend the last few minutes talking about some other issues that either might come up as part of the Farm Bill or come up that the Ag Committee is going to have to deal with. Now, Vince, you just brought this up, but Jerry, tell me if you agree. I think one of the things our listeners probably don't know, a lot of people don't know, is the role that the Ag Committee plays in the CFTC in derivative markets and how that ties into crypto.
Yes. Okay. The House and Senate Ag Committees have jurisdiction over the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and indirectly over the futures industry. And this is because when futures first started, it was just minerals and agricultural commodities. Well, then the industry invented financial futures, and the Ag Committees have retained their control over this. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that they can get good campaign contributions out of the futures industry. But anyway, they have this. Now, farmers are always complaining about getting no respect. And I would say that applies here, that all the people who deal with the Securities and Exchange Commission and the banking regulators and all of that, they kind of poo-poo the Ag Committees being involved in the CFTC and also the CFTC itself. But it's still there. And now with this problem of the collapse of FTX, the Ag Committees are now going to have to be involved in figuring out what to do about that. They need to figure out how to regulate cryptocurrency because it is currently unregulated, it's unstable, and people, first they were making billions of dollars, and now they're losing billions of dollars. And I think that in the early part of 2023, the Ag Committees, as well as the other committees of jurisdiction in Congress, are going to have to get involved in this. The main issue is the CFTC has the authority to regulate anything that's based on commodities. The SEC regulates things that are based on securities. So you can't take the CFTC and the Senate and House Ag Committees out of this debate. They will have to be in there.
Fascinating. That's definitely a stakeholder we missed was crypto.
One of the issues will be what crossover is there between the key committees that handle those issues. The Banking Committee, on which a senator from Montana, John Tester, sits. But Tester does not sit on the Ag Committee, for example. And so there are really interesting legislative questions and legislative authority questions, it seems to me, Jerry. Am I right or wrong there?
There are questions, but most of the time the questions are raised by the critics of the CFTC and the Ag Committee involvement. They believe that the other committees should have the authority. But I believe both the CFTC and the Ag Committees are going to stand up for themselves and maintain their role in all of this.
Yeah, I believe that. I find that entirely credible.
So, Vince, let me ask you, as an economist, we've talked about actually how global trends end up playing out in this. We talked about input costs being higher, presumably because of global energy prices, but also commodity prices being higher. What should we be thinking about in terms of the farm bill or the farm economy with interest rates? And what does that mean with farmers and farm policy?
Well, just a quick word on the cost of production. We're really talking about fertilizer and chemical costs.
Right.
And there, what goes up also goes down. For example, we've seen a dramatic fall in the price of, I think it's potash. We're back to where we were a year and a half ago at half its major price. And even nitrogen fertilizer prices have fallen. And the same is true for agricultural commodity prices. They'll go up, they'll go down. If you're in farming for the short run, you're in the wrong business. It's very lucrative in the long run. The average rate of return, real rate of return on assets is 6%. But you raise this really important question about interest rates. So we would tend to say the following. If we didn't look at the data, we would tend to say the following. Well, interest rates have more than doubled, and farmers have land and they have other forms of debt. And so that's really increased their cost of production. However, now you look at the data. The debt to asset ratio in farming is barely fractionally above 13%, according to the most recent USDA data that came out a couple of days, 4 or 5 days ago. So in fact, relative to assets, farmers are borrowing very little. And that's the bottom line. So relative to, say, some other industries where debt to asset ratios are 25%, 40%, the impact of higher interest rates on the farmer's costs of production when you count all costs, are actually quite modest compared to other sectors of the economy. So you will hear a lot about high interest rates. Kansas City Fed put out something quite recently on interest rates that said, well, it's really going to affect farm borrowing. To which my response is, a little bit. But it's not going to have a huge impact on the bottom line for most farms. When you have corn prices 60% above long-run projections, wheat prices more than double, soybean prices ludicrously high from a historical level. That's not going to affect whether or not you buy a new combine or a new tractor. It will have a little bit of an effect on the bottom line, but those effects are sort of built into this year's farm income forecast, which say we're going to have a 49-year high in real farm income. Farming is doing incredibly well by historical standards. The average farm net farm income, according to USDA, the average farm's net farm income is $135,000 for 2022. And it would be about $100,000 if prices dropped back to where they were in 21. So we're looking at a very successful sector.
But one point I'd like to make in the broadest sense is, to me, the real wild card in agricultural policy and the condition of farms is the situation in Ukraine. These prices are so high because it's so difficult to get commodities out of the Ukraine. And secondly, we have the issue of dependence on Russia for the ingredients that go into fertilizer.
Right.
And I think those issues are very volatile. The ag world does not really want to deal with this. They just keep talking about being free traders, and then there's also the issue of the U.S. relationship with China. If China gets too mad at the U.S., they might try to stop importing so much from the U.S., and then that could also cause commodity prices to go down. So I think those things are very volatile, and in a way they go back to explaining why we have a farm bill going back to the 1930s, is this volatility both in weather and in international markets.
But what we do not have are most farmers living below the poverty line. We have the overwhelming, over 98% of all farms are well above the poverty line. So that's a little bit different. And I've got one addendum. One of the reasons why, particularly for oilseed crops, so that and corn, those prices are so strong, has been the shift towards mandating biodiesel within the U.S. The mandates that are coming in.
You mean biodiesel or all biofuels?
All biofuels, really, but an extension into the modern biofuels. The move in Illinois to mandate very substantial amounts of biofuels, the California requirements, those are underpinning corn prices.
Right.
It's not Ukraine. It's and they're underpinning soybean prices. The commodity at risk is wheat.
But they were underpinning the prices earlier, when they were not as high as they are now.
But the Ukraine crisis has really mattered for wheat. It's mattered a little bit for soybeans, and it's hard to see that it's mattered very much for corn.
Well, let's get close to wrapping up, and so maybe 30 seconds for each of you. What's one more thing that maybe we've missed, or if you had somebody's ear on farm policy and ag policy, you would tell them to pay attention to in the next year? Jerry?
I will also watch what we call the smaller programs. How you're helping organic farmers. What's going to happen with vertical farming in this farm bill? Will it be subsidized? It's all those small things that can get the votes of the suburbanites and the urbanites for the farm bill, and that will be part of the debate.
Vince?
Two things. Thing one is, I would really hope that very seriously Congress focuses on funding for agricultural R&D, not because I'll get into it, but because it's the way forward to deal with climate change.
Fascinating.
The other issue, which is an issue that I've personally cared about for a long time, is humanitarian aid reform, reforming the current rules that mandate U.S. sourcing and shipping half of the product on U.S. Flagged ships, not necessarily U.S. owned ship, but flagged ships. That adds about 25 to 30% to the cost of getting food aid to where it's most desperately needed, and that's a waste. That's a pure waste, and it's, from a soft power perspective, it's a disaster, and from a humanitarian perspective, it weakens the ability of the U.S. to do good in the world.
Jerry, Vince, thank you guys so much today. Hopefully this will only be our first podcast, because I think we could all sit here for another hour and dive into some of these issues we barely even touched on. And thank you everyone to listening to this edition of What's at Stake, a Penta podcast. Tune in next week and visit us at pentagroup.co to learn more. Thank you.